Many of you will know that Amazon has their job interview structured around their leadership principles. And maybe not so many of you know that 10 years ago you had to pay thousands of dollars to find out possible interview questions for those leadership principles. It was really challenging to find insight into how these interviews work. Well, nowadays, things have evolved, things have changed, and in a positive direction, in my opinion, to the extent that Amazon even shares the leadership principles they're going to screen you on for many types of roles in these job interviews. I've heard this both for the screening rounds, but even more interestingly for the final interview rounds. I've heard this primarily on the West Coast, Seattle, LA, and also in Europe, in London to be specific. That was the last case I've interacted with, candidate I interacted with from. Now, why is this a positive change, and how does this change expectations in Amazon interviews? Okay, so first of all, I've been preaching for a long time that candidates have a hard time understanding complexity of behavioral interviews. What makes a great candidate in a behavioral interview? And I even argued in some of my previous videos that I could share these interview questions with you in advance, and I actually did experiment this as well. I also share many of these questions in my training programs, and even though you know the questions you're going to get asked in advance, still this won't correlate well with passing that job interview, be it a screening round and even a final interview round. Okay, so especially if you're a technical person, you know that if you know the questions in advance on the technical side, you are far more likely to pass them, right? Well, in a behavioral interview, it doesn't really work this way, right? Now, why would this be the case? Primarily because of the fact that in a behavioral interview, the candidate with the best stories wins. Whereas if you prepare on some questions, chances are from experience that you're far more likely to prepare on that interview reactively, more like a trivia, to find out, to be able to answer any interview question versus to give the best possible interview answer to the question you're getting asked. That's why preparing Amazon interviews is around story banks and preparing your best stories that you would want to pitch in the job interview. That's why in Amazon interviews, it's quite common for the interviewers to take notes on the reasoning that, hey, you could be selling yourself only on your best stories and spin them over and over again, because of the fact that in a behavioral interview, people with the best stories wins. And if you only have 3 stories that you spin all over, that's called cheating in a behavioral interview, right? So long story short, this is a positive outcome, the fact that Amazon now shares, at least for some roles, at least in some geographies, the leadership principles and even some sample questions that you're going to get asked. However, this is also, in my opinion, a way they would increase the bar, the bar that it takes to pass this job interview, simply because, if everyone knows the questions, you can imagine that it's even more obvious that the difference is always going to be made on the quality of your story. So my recommendation to you would be to, of course, take this information and take advantage of it if you're being provided with those principles, but keep in mind that it's still very much so about both building a story bank, revising your story bank a number of times, and still role-playing these job interviews. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.